We're here at Driade. Let's check the pronunciation.
Is that the way they pronounce it?
I said Driade.
Yeah.
Driade.
Driade.
Driade. They said Driade. Longing you. Driade. Anyway, this is a pleasant spot in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that is not far removed from where our discussions began back in throughout the period of 2006, I guess, through
You're right.
2006, did you say? About 6 years or so, where we met at Weaver Street Market Tuesdays and Thursdays for
political discussions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And to ventilate a bit.
Right.
Instead of screaming at the walls at home or your dog or your wife, we could ventilate.
Yeah.
And that meant a lot to many of us, even though.
And we're all of a certain age. Bill was, 16 years older than I. 10 years older than you?
He was 86. That's
when he died. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I met him in about 2005 or so.
But he was old enough so that, he could have remembered Franklin Roosevelt was president. As he was born in 1927 or 28. And I was born exactly a week before Franklin Roosevelt died. And all of us are in about 60s or 70s. And so we have long memories. So we sat around and talked about how things have changed.
Well, I was thinking it's so pleasant here that it's hard to get your mind around all this stuff in history that is less pleasant. And maybe that's our problem. Maybe we're not moving because of the accessibility. If you have any extra money at all, you can do things that conceal all the crap there is to hide. And so that perpetuates the juggernaut of what's going on behind the scene history.
One of the things that informed the book I wrote was the notion that for John Kennedy and Richard Nixon, who were in the Navy in the same time in World War II, went into politics virtually at the same time, there was only one president for y'all, and it was Franklin Roosevelt. Even though Nixon was a Republican, John Kennedy was a Democrat. That was the model for being president, and in some ways, I think that's what got John Kennedy killed and Richard Nixon hounded out of office. That they actually thought they were president of the United States, and I don't think the other ones have had that nurture. Not Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan thought he was president, but he wasn't. I think maybe George Bush was actually president. Yeah. But behind these people has been the kind of establishment consensus about, how things are supposed to go. And John Kennedy violated it to his peril. And Richard Nixon turned out to be a liberal, which I don't think sat very well with people. Yeah. So we have the official version of how Nixon went out. And we have some other notions as well.
Well, there was a time when the official word had some standing. Oh, maybe during that period, and not so much since then. Except for the mainstream. I guess the fringe of the mainstream has always been kind of critical, I guess.
But it's interesting to see the mainstream journalists who actually stood up for the truth and were hounded out, removed, silenced. Daniel Shore lost his job at CBS for revealing the Pike Commission report on the CIA, the illegalities in the 70s. So even then, when things were more open, it was possible to go too far, and he did. And in our own time, Seymour Hersh works for the New York Times, and was pretty much forced out of the Times, went to the New Yorker, and they eventually decided not to print his stuff. And the last article that he wrote for the New Yorker that they wouldn't print, he got printed in the London Review of Books. So, he's not even in print in the United States anymore. So he's probably the last of our really good investigative journalists.
Well, McClatchy Press has been pretty good. I don't know if they're still going, but they held a pretty good standing with the mid and left liberals.
But of course, with the rise of the internet and the almost total silence of the left after 9/11, he did all these blogs rising on the internet, and that's changed the whole nature of the news, really, for those of us who get our news there instead of from the New York Times or Time Magazine or Newsweek.
Do you think that's an expansion of democracy, or?
Yeah. Yes, I think as long as voices like from David Sirota, and Robert Scheer, who's been around a long time, News Ramparts magazine. He's now Truth Dig. That's his blog. That's where
Hedges is on it.
That's where you find Chris Hedges. Yeah, and I think it's that mentality in a lot of ways that has gotten some of the older people like us ready for a Bernie Sanders, and on the radio today on NPR, the National Republican Radio. It used to be liberal, but people haven't noticed. I guess it's pretty right wing. They were talking about how Bernie Sanders is just a flash in the pan, and pretty much how Hillary Clinton will, continue to garner votes even after New Hampshire, which would be a disaster, which I didn't mention. So that you get these left-wing voices, even when NPR is spouting the establishment pablum that we're all supposed to eat. So anyway, this I'll put in a plug for my book. This is McConkey. It's a political novel. It's got a picture of the old man who's so wise, so knowing, Jack McConkey, and it's by John J. McConkey. It's a name that I made up because I felt like the sound of it. And in the beginning of the book, which is set over here on the other end of Chapel Hill at Beaver Street Market, somebody asked me a question. Well, this stuff. Well, why don't you write a book? I said, I am. This is it. And I lost a lot of it to a virus on my computer, and my son had about half of it. So I took that as a sign to get back to it. And I started about this time 2 years ago, I guess. Was it? No, last year in January, and the end of January, and was finished by the beginning of April. And it goes from 1892 with the Homestead Strike being put down by Pinkerton agents, by Carnegie and Frick, and ends in the winter of 2015 with the CIA overthrowing the Ukrainian sovereign government, elected government, and Putin pushing up to the edge of Ukraine to protect the Russian citizens and Russian Ukrainians in the east of the Ukraine.
No. The background is that we came out of these discussions with a head full of history.
Right. It's amazing how many of us together could remember all kinds of stuff.
Well, 2 or 3 of you were actually taught history. I know Pete and possibly, I don't know if you taught history, but yeah, I taught history for a time. And then Phil possibly also, who was not a regular, but he came and changed my name.
He had an interesting perspective because he's from French Canada.
Yeah.
He's not an American.
And so all those flavors, I guess we're talking about maybe a half dozen people,
Right.
not always regular, but a group of very interested people. I kind of thought of as the fossil commies of cardboard.
Right. Right. Yeah,
That had,
the Democratic Socialists before Bernie Sanders came along.
I'd always picture these old Greek guys, lined up against the wall in the morning sun of April, grousing about whatever is going on. But it was a good period. Anyway, it's hard to realize that it's hard to contain all this stuff that is in the history that you bring out, many details that you bring out, and also others.
Well, just to pick up on what you were saying about the people, one of the things about being old is if you've been paying attention, you do actually learn a few things. I say sometimes that old people in this country are not expected to know anything. So we generally don't have to stand up kind of mewing and puking as in our old age, as Shakespeare says. But it really devastated me, and it really hit me when Bill, who was a member of our group, died in 2013, and the oldest member of our group, the one who had been in the CIA, and the one who was the most consistent leftist, I think, among us, probably because of his experience in Berlin in the 60s. But, aside from the fact that he was probably my best friend at that time, I really missed his perspective. And when he died, he didn't write anything. Whatever he said to us that we learned, we have, and I'm 70, I'll be 71. You're in your 70s. Most of us are getting up there, Whatever we know that's worth passing on, I figured I had to write down,
Yeah.
And one of the things at the end of the book is our discussions, my recreation of our discussions at Weaver Street. And my sister read it, and before it was printed, and she said, well, that sounds kind of didactic. And I said, well, we were didactic, we were all trying to teach each other something, and we actually did talk like that, at least as I rendered it as closely as I could to the way we talked. And everybody had a different perspective on things, and I was thinking how important it was to me to get those things written down and to memorialize our conversations, because nobody knows what things were like, Okay. And the history that we're taught is superficial at best and wrong and skewed at worst. And so it was really fun to create a character in the novel who actually remembered all the way back, because he was so old, and to have him talking to his younger nephew or great nephew, and telling him how he remembered and how different it was from the official version. So that's what I was.
Those details are just amazing. As I read your book, you almost had that be there. The structure of the book is kind of interesting in that it's a novel, and so you don't really need acknowledgments or all acknowledgments. You don't really need references.
I mean,
Because
footnotes
it's a
and
novel.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did put at the end the books that I felt had most.
the acknowledgments were terrific. Yeah, a numbered reference shows a source but may not authenticate its verifiability.
Well, that's one reason I made it a novel, is that one of the things about history books, maybe not to historians who tend to have a more sophisticated view of history, but to most people, if you read in a history book, it's true. Somebody important said it,
Right.
and it must be true.
They're in black and white.
Right. It says there in black and white. But what you figure out, if you're thinking about it, and if you're an historian, you know this anyway, is that what you're getting always is somebody's version of the story, and it depends on what their personal bias is. And I've begun to think that people who claim to be objective are just not telling the truth. Everybody has a bias. I'd like to know what the bias is going in, because that way you understand, the ethical dimension of the writer. You understand his character, in terms of what political stance he's taking, if he's writing about politics or history, because everybody has a bias. Everybody is standing someplace, and to pretend that you're objective is disingenuous.
I keep the stories that I want to keep,
Sure.
and I screen everything else through the filter of my own bias. And so that's just human nature, probably. But it's not bad to fess up to it.
Well, at least people know where you're standing. Yeah. And then it depends. You could be blind to certain things too. But as to the footnote stuff, I wasn't writing a history book. What I was trying to do was write stuff that was accessible to everybody. My ostensible audience was you, was my son, my sister, my wife, and I wanted to interweave a story of people and the historical situation, the political situation at the time, so that there was kind of a sense of what was going on for people at that time, and how larger events affected ordinary people's lives.
Well, amongst mainstream, there is a satisfaction in keeping the official version of the big stories consistent with prior school-taught beliefs about American exceptionalism.
Right. Yeah. And I think having the notion that we're better, more moral, more ethical than other people is dangerous. And I think that, especially in light of what our military and our CIA and our government at large have been doing, to think that we're better than other people is keeping us from a realistic understanding of our own place in the universe, so that we keep making the same stupid mistakes over and over again, and then blaming them on other people, which you could describe as paranoia, but there's much sense in going that far.
So all this, to me, this kind of always goes back to left versus right viewpoint, and things are fairly clear to me, but not especially clear to the mainstream, since we see a drift to the right in liberalism,
Right.
toward neoliberalism,
Yeah.
and neocons getting an edge in the drift. So the left really doesn't have much chance anymore, because the press is essentially gone to the right.
So you could say, I would say, in fact, that the very vacuum of a response from the left, a leftist story, almost inevitably had to create the rise of Bernie Sanders. That vacuum, things have gone so far to the right, and they're so controlled by the establishment, that a Bernie Sanders almost had to occur. That's, Hegelian dialectic or Marxist dialectic, however you want to see it. But the status quo gives rise to its opposite, to its antithesis. And then some new synthesis arises out of that.
As a natural balance.
As a natural rebalancing, yeah. And I think that's as good a way to see it as anything. And I don't think you can you can neglect a point of view forever. You have to come to terms with it. And the way that the official version of reality has done that is the media and our government officials, is that they have swept it off the table. When they use the term, this is off the table, like single payer or impeachment for the Bush officials who lied to us and declared an illegal war, it being off the table. They're telling us not to look behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, so that we'll all be Dorothy and not know what's going on.
Do you see correlations between the decline in civil liberties, the growth of fascism-based corporatocracy, and political conservatism?
Yeah. To take your last point first, political conservatism hasn't been political conservatism since Robert Taft in the 1940s, early 1950s. To me, political conservatism is conserving old values in new situations. The American conservative, all the way back to the founding fathers, was in favor of low taxes. There was no income tax until 1913, federal income tax. They survived on tariffs, small government, no standing army, a standing navy because you have to protect the seas and your trade across borders. Right, and of course, Great Britain was impressing our seamen in the beginning of the 19th century. But it's small government, and true political conservatives are small government, low taxes, maximum amount of freedom. Barry Goldwater was a conservative in a lot of ways, but he was for big military, and just as Ronald Reagan was. And when you've got big military, and you can't run small government, you just can't. Government gets big, and it controls that. But to the further point about civil liberties, the people who've run this country since the Civil War don't believe in civil liberties. They don't. I mean, our sainted president, Abraham Lincoln, suspended habeas corpus. Well, you could say, well, he had to, and maybe he did, but he did it. And after that, with the rise of American capitalism, money talked. That was. It's not a new thing that the super rich have more of a say than the rest of us. That's not new. That's a constant in an American society, and it was only redressed from 1933 to 1963, from the inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, where he specifically said, our government has been taken over by the Wall Street bankers, and he was going to overturn the money changers' tables in the temple. and they, they didn't like that, but he did it anyway. And that sort of New Deal attitude toward big business and Wall Street banks really was perpetuated on through until John Kennedy, who told the steel industry to roll back their prices, and told the generals that the Vietnam War was a bad idea, and he was beginning to listen to Douglas MacArthur. I think we said that anybody who would wage a land war in Asia should have his head examined. So I think maybe it's a myth that I like to believe anyway, that John Kennedy was on the way to extricating us from Vietnam when he was killed.
I like to think that too. Chomsky comes up with some stuff that is kind of interesting. He's saying that Kennedy ordered bombing of South Vietnam in 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And he sticks with that. But I don't know that he has much following. I don't see it anywhere else. But Jack talks about Huey Long, short strip.
Oh yes.
Huey Long.
Oh yeah.
He
Old
tells us
Jack.
about
Old
the,
Jack McConkey.
he tells us about the September 35 assassination of Huey Long, and that many of his Robin Hood style share the wealth ideas were picked up actually by Roosevelt and made law that same year, such as Social Security, WPA, aid to dependent children, the National Labor Relations Board, and the Revenue Act of 35, which boosted the highest rate to 75%.
Right, and then in the war, he raised it to what 91%, and it stayed there through the Eisenhower years, and was only lowered to 77% under Lyndon Johnson. And one of the other day, somebody was talking about the Koch brothers on Facebook, and I've finally gotten into Facebook, but commenting on stuff, and the comment that I wrote that got the most play, the most likes, the most comments was I said, if we raised the taxes on the top 1/100th of 1% to Eisenhower levels, they wouldn't be able to ruin our life anymore. That was a great idea. And, it's the argument there is that really rich people aren't any smarter than the rest of us. And we could argue that they're actually not as smart, but I don't think I'll answer that. But that with all that money, they've got too much time to think about ways to screw us. And they have plenty of money to do it. Look at the Koch brothers with all their super PACs and backing all these terrible people like Ted Cruz and other sort of nightmare Republican candidates like that. The one thing about Donald Trump that I think a lot of people like is that he's not taking any of these large political contributions. So, whatever he is, he's not owned by anybody. I mean, he's still really, really scarce. But, Bernie Sanders is the same way. He's not taking any big contributions. He's not beholden.
Unlike Hillary.
Yeah. And Bernie Sanders actually has a real program, and we'll talk about stuff. Hillary won't talk about anything that's important to us.
So the coming debate should benefit Bernie.
Well, of course, she can't actually talk about anything except in the vaguest terms. And, after the election, if she were to get elected president, I don't think she's electable. I think the chances of our having a nightmare Republican president are really good. So people ought to be paying more attention to Bernie Sanders, because I think he can actually win, because he wants to change America for the better. She doesn't want to change anything. I mean, the number of people of big corporations and banks that have given her money is, Fortune 500 or Forbes 500 list of the biggest corporations in America.
Tools of the ruling class might include position, power, authority, office, influence, financial resource, connections. Is a revolution necessary to retool this list, or can we live with it as it is?
Well, we can't live with it as it is, because it doesn't stay as it is. It keeps getting worse. The thing about greed is there just never seems to be enough. The thing about power and ambition is there never seems to be enough. So that, when I first noticed the way that the top 1% were getting everything, it occurred to me something I've said for a long time, which is, I don't mind people being rich. I just don't want them to take money away from me, which is what's been happening since Ronald Reagan. The ordinary people's wages haven't gone up since Jimmy Carter, and all of the increase in productivity in our factories and businesses has gone up and up and up, and ordinary people haven't gotten the benefit of their wages.
And a lot was lost during the SNL collapse of 79, 78. Hey, that true.
Well, it started with the deregulation that Carter put in because S&Ls weren't able to keep up with the interest rates, which went up to 18%. They couldn't they couldn't give out interest rates like that. So they were starting to buckle under. So the first of the easing of regulations came under Carter, and then under Reagan, who is known for having done that. And then the debacle came at the end of the Reagan administration under George Bush. And people lost their savings. But, the federal government was able to bail out the S&Ls. But the worst thing that happened was the two things that have really cost people in this country wealth were the inflation under Jimmy Carter and the rise in interest rates, and the fact that wages were flat, so people were whipsawed. Wages didn't go up, and interest rates went sky high. At the same time, and they had a word for it. It was stagflation, and so suddenly money was worthless, practically, and you couldn't live on what you were making. So the whole standard of living went down under the sainted Jimmy Carter, and you could say, well, it wasn't his fault. Well, he was the president. If you wreck the Titanic and you're the captain, whose fault is the running into the iceberg? So the loss of wealth between 76 and 80 probably was probably the biggest up to that point of loss of wealth of ordinary people, the middle class and the working class. And the other one is the loss of value of houses that occurred from 2007 through, 2008, 9, 10. And so most ordinary people have their greatest wealth in their houses. And because of that loss, and a lot of people just lost their houses because they couldn't keep up with the payments. They had overreached.
And with the wage vacuum, then people would compensate with credit card charges.
Credit cards came in the late 70s. It's a brilliant move, and make people uphold their standard of living by going into debt, and
then charge them 18% on
right
interest, and plus late charges.
Right,
late charges are one of the biggest money makers for banks.
Right, and you see that ought to all be illegal. There ought to be a grace period for those sorts of things. That actually brings us to the reform of the bankruptcy laws, and the big business, the big banks and credit card companies wanted to reform the bankruptcy laws, because what happened was when the big banks and their credit cards screwed the credit card holders for their debt, when they realized that they actually couldn't pay off their debt, then you end up with vampire interest rates. So it goes up to 29%, and people declare bankruptcy. Well, they didn't want people to declare bankruptcy. They wanted to get every last drop of blood out of them they could. So in 1999, Elizabeth Warren tells the story that she went to Hillary Clinton and said, listen, this is a bad idea, this bankruptcy law, and it's going to pass the House and the Senate, and I really want your husband to veto it and not put it into office. Well, she said Hillary Clinton was one of the quickest studies she'd ever had. And of course, Elizabeth Warren's a college professor. She's professor of economics at Harvard. She said Hillary picked up on what was wrong with the bankruptcy law and how it would hurt, single mothers and divorced women and people who were down and out and just barely holding on to their car and their jobs. And she talked Bill Clinton into vetoing it. He didn't exactly veto it. He used what was called the pocket veto, and he just let his presidency expire without signing it. So, it doesn't go into law in that case. It just, they have to start over in the next Congress, and they did. And when Hillary Clinton ran for Senate in New York, which is, means that she got a lot of money from the big banks, the bankruptcy law raised its ugly head again in 2001, and this time she voted for it. Well, it didn't pass 2001, but it came up again in 2005, and this time she wasn't there to vote for it. She didn't show up. She said she was in the hospital where Bill Clinton was getting some scar tissue removed from his four artery bypass that had developed, and she couldn't make it there for the vote. So she weaseled out of that one. I suppose she might have been able to, go over to Walter Reed later in the day or something, but she didn't vote for it then. So I suppose she was already thinking of running for president later. Yes.
So since around 1890, the ruling class has had their way with the rest of us, with the exception of the New Deal period from 32 to about 66. Now in the time when regressive tax structure, preemptive military strikes, demonizing of the Islamic world to fuel permanent war, extraordinary rendition, and torture by proxy was common operating procedure, the dualish element of our current ruling class was fairly easy to identify. In a few years, they will be gone. You see them being replaced by those who will continue the patterns of the past and enforce a status quo continuum, or is revolution necessary to get beyond the old pattern cycle?
Wow, that's a question. Is there an answer there? Okay. So, let me reframe the question a little bit. Okay. One of the things I've tried to do in this book is figure out how Wall Street, which is not really in favor of war, there's an argument to be made that the bankers on Wall Street and the lawyers on Wall Street were the original OSS people, and they became the people who originated the CIA. You could say that if that the Rockefellers and the other bankers and oil people found a need for CIA, so they didn't have to send the Marines in every single time to overthrow a government, that the CIA could do something quick and dirty that didn't involve boots on the ground, and that was good for stability, which is good for bankers, and it's good for oil companies. Okay, I understand that. That's the basic neoliberal attitude. We didn't have a name for it back then, but that's the neoliberal attitude that, money rules and banks rule, and we really want stability worldwide unless they decide to destabilize something. There's the other attitude is the attitude of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower was worried about, and that's what you're talking about. That basic neocon attitude that they never met a war that they didn't like. And one of the good things about Bill Clinton was he really didn't get us involved in any war. So, everything domestically he did put his finger to was a disaster, from NAFTA to the getting rid of Glass-Steagall that caused so much trouble for the rest of us. But I wonder what the accommodation has been between the New York banker Wall Street attitude, this neoliberal attitude, and the warrior or warhawk mentality. And in the book I just sort of for fun called it the Yankees versus the New York Yankees versus the Dallas Cowboys, that kind of thing. Two different, one's baseball and one's football. But the basic attitude is that sort of military-industrial complex that runs from California across Texas, and oil complex as well through the South. And what accommodation got made that brought us Barack Obama, who, basically continued the policies of George W. Bush. You could say he ramped down the wars, which he did, but didn't get rid of them, and went for something that's a little quicker and cleaner and deadly, maybe on a smaller scale, in drone warfare, while accommodating himself to all of these things that Wall Street wanted to do. It's kind of a neocon and a neoliberal attitude, and you see that in Hillary Clinton too. It's like, man, and she more than Obama, that she's beholden to everybody. She's, she was all in favor of the Iraq War, and she was all in favor of going in against Syria. She positively boosted the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya. I mean, this is the neocon attitude. So how did they put those two attitudes completely together? Because it looks impregnable. And yet, here we have Bernie Sanders coming forth, criticizing the domestic programs that these neocons and neoliberals have, which is basically to disestablish the New Deal and the Social Security and Johnson's Medicare, which is a continuation of the New Deal idea, and all this foreign involvement in the American empire. Somehow, the neocon attitude and the neoliberal attitude have merged. But Bernie Sanders is questioning more on the domestic level, but his attitude toward all war all the time is that he's skeptical of it. He's skeptical of this notion of American exceptionalism and that we can do anything we want to with our military. But he has not yet stepped forward and said, it's against international law to overthrow a sovereign government that has not attacked you. I want nice of it. Why? So, is it going to continue? Going to take a while. Going to take an awful lot more education to get people to understand that we don't have any right to do this to other countries. I mean, we wouldn't put up with it if they did retire. And it's interesting, though, the people who really stand up against that kind of stuff are the libertarians. The real libertarians like Ron Paul or even Rand Paul. Like, foreign involvement is probably a bad thing. I mean, that's left over from the really conservative small government idea. We have no right to be here. It's against the idea of other people's freedom, and it's against the notion of small government. That's such a big no.
But there's a mentality that says might is right, and might will write history, and it's hard to deny that. It's kind of an ugly fact, maybe. I don't know.
But if you keep losing all these wars, don't you think that kind of undermines that? I mean, where's the might if you keep losing? I mean, we've lost every war since Vietnam.
Well, we've been able to fake it so far, but knows how it's going to play out.
Well, that comes down to the complicity of the American people. That is, at what point are we responsible for this mess we're in? For this horrible amount of killing that we've done, like in Iraq, overthrowing governments, killing people with drones, and calling the innocent people we killed collateral damage. I mean, that's just it's just the Orwell, isn't it?
Yeah, the problem is the conservatives are untroubled by morality, if I see it. And so it's just more of a longer perspective of history will be written.
I wouldn't blame it on the conservatives. I don't think there are any true conservatives left. These right-wing neocons, they're not conservative. If you go back I mean, if you accept what I say about Robert Taft and go back all the way back to the founding fathers.
Yeah, I should say
That-
conservatism is
Yeah, I mean,
changed.
there's nothing conservative about neoconservatives. They're aggressive. They're inventing new policies of things that they can do to mess up the rest of the world. And the liberal class has completely folded. I mean, beyond a certain age, we're the Democrats are mostly supporting Hillary Clinton. People born before 1970 are all supporting Hillary Clinton. At least half of them are. If you look at Iowa and say, well, okay, that's the middle of America. Let's say that's representative. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is. But half of the people voted for Hillary Clinton. And she stands for all of these war policies and neoliberal screw the public and reduce the New Deal programs that we've been seeing from all of these Wall Street DLC politicians.
So it makes you think of how Martin Luther King, in his last year, how betrayed he was by black people when he went against Vietnam. He started waving the flag of the evils of racism, poverty, and militarism.
That's exactly what he said. You're right.
And, there was a percentage, I can't remember the percentages, but he lost a lot of people that were on his side before. Mm-hmm. As soon as he starts talking against Vietnam, and of course that was his undoing to fit right. Johnson turned against him that year. He started to be critical about Vietnam.
But his last speeches were about economic justice. And when you start talking about economic justice in this country, you better talk. Because somebody's going to take a shot at it. And they did. James Earl Ray.
He was a threat.
Well, I mean, Ray, I don't know whether he was in on it or not, but Ray got himself a passport, a Canadian passport. And when he was apprehended in England, he had an English passport. Now, where did he get those? Is this a lone gunman?
Well, headmen are always available.
Well, I mean, especially if they work for the government. I mean, I can't go out and hire a hitman. Probably somebody would notice. You have to have some people to do that.
Yeah, have a couple of generations of separation. Being the funder.
But back to the notion of talking about economic justice. Bobby Kennedy started talking about economic justice. And picking up the Martin Luther King banner as best a white man could. But when you start talking about economic justice the way Bernie Sanders is now, you better, he's going to get Secret Service protection. But I would vet the Secret Service guys. I don't think it's paranoid to say, you better look and see who's taking care of you. Because the vested interests in this country don't want to hear about economic justice. That's dangerous talk. That's commie talk. And they won't put up with this.
There are recurring patterns of our black ops reach over the past century, such as tinkering with the stability of South and Central American governments. You see this as continuing ebb and flow, or have drug money operations replaced the old political manipulations?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you combine questions, don't you? Drug money. Well, drug money has a big connection with the CIA. Probably the highest connection. It started with Vietnam War and paying for a lot of illegal operations in Southeast Asia through drug dealing. That was continued in Central America in the 80s under helping to fund the Contra War against a communist regime in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, or so they call it. In any case, the United States government, Ronald Reagan's government, and the businesses that want to do business in Central and South America did not like the idea of a leftist government in Nicaragua that would redistribute land and look for economic justice for all the people. So Reagan, over against the will of Congress and the Boland Amendment, one of the Boland Amendments, decided to overthrow the government, and because there wasn't any money for it, they funded it first through the Iran-Contra business of harms, and then from drugs. And so the CIA went into kind of quasi business with the drug people in South America and inundated this country with powder cocaine and crack cocaine. And some few people tried to break that story open, but basically it was kept under wraps in the 80s, and they were bringing drugs into various points for a while. To Florida, got hot for them in Florida. They brought them to Louisiana, and it got hot for them there. They brought them into a small airport in western Arkansas, Nina, right on the border with Oklahoma. There were attempts by local and state attorneys and U.S. attorneys in Arkansas to break that case, and at TV stations and some of the newspapers tried to break it open, and the lid was clamped down on us by probably the CIA under the auspices, I think, of George H.W. Bush, who had been head of the CIA, and you had to do such things. And so this country was flooded with drugs, particularly black communities. That was brought out in the 90s very well by Gary Webb. Yeah. And his reports for the San Jose Mercury. And the interesting thing about that was that every single major newspaper, from the LA Times to the New York Times, came down on him as being a liar. Well, he won a Pulitzer Prize to that series of stories. And in order to protect himself, he was the first one, the Mercury was the first paper, put all the documents on the internet. And from that time on, everything that's ever been put up on the internet is on the internet. They take down sites, but, other people have garnered the information, put it on other sites. It is interesting the way Wikipedia has been edited in the last few years. But the drug business came out again in the 90s with Webb's things, and of course, after Gary Webb was completely discredited and lost his job as a newspaper investigative reporter, he committed suicide. But did he? I mean, he had 2 gunshots in his head. 2. Okay. So did he commit suicide, or was he suicided?
You want to make sure. So he shot himself.
Shot himself twice. Right. And then you've got our involvement in Afghanistan in the decade of the early 2000s, going after Osama bin Laden. Well, the Taliban that ran Afghanistan shut down the heroin puppy trade. And when we got in there, the CIA opened it back up again, and got involved in the sale of heroin. Well, lo and behold, in the next decade, you've got a bunch of people who are taking prescription drugs like oxycodones and getting hooked on it, and then becoming heroin addicts. I think I just read that the biggest cause of death among white American workers is heroin overdose. It's coming up as a cause of death, and our own government we've had a war on drugs since 1980. We haven't had a war on drugs. We've had a war on the American people. We've had a war on black people with the crack cocaine. We've had a war now on poor white people who are, with heroin addiction. And our own government's been involved in it. If it wasn't involved in it, the, it would have succeeded. I mean, if they weren't colluding in it, it would have worked.
Sean Penn wanted to talk about that. I think he has that story. But he was not. Charlie Rose interviewed for an hour or 2 hours now.
Have you read his Rolling Stone?
I have.
I haven't either.
I think that's his story. That's what he wanted to get out. But you can see the cuts in the interview.
Yeah.
It's like you will see cuts in this interview.
Yeah.
Where you have people are well, he was not allowed. Charlie wouldn't allow him to talk about what he wanted to talk about, what was up. He stated up front that the war on drugs was an issue, but Charlie kept hammering on this thing about did you have in mind for capture of
El Chapo.
Yeah. What was that? He kept going back to the sensational aspect of the whole.
Well, he didn't ignore it. Nobody wants to talk about the government involvement in drug sales, and most people, even people whose eyes are open in other ways, just can't believe that our own government would be
they don't want to
aiding and abetting them.
They want to.
Well, it's just another business, and it's really, really lucrative, and it's just capitalism, right? I mean, they've screwed the American people in so many other ways. How about drugs?
Well, it goes back, and this is maybe not relevant, but it opens up this other avenue of recuperate has to do with the scarcity of money. And Mark Pittman came out with some revelations with his suit against the Federal Reserve, as he won after some wrangling that went to the Supreme Court and they rejected. They didn't want to hear it, so the lower court's opinion stood, and they had to release, call it the thousands of documents.
Right, which shows how much money they gave to European banks.
Trillions of dollars.
Right.
With a bottomless pit of money, which makes you wonder about the scarcity of money and why doesn't CIA and other dark off-budget entities, why don't they just fit on the Federal Reserve? It's hard to get your mind around that.
Who would authorize the CIA?
What?
The CIA is an agency. They don't do stuff on their own. One of the things I said in my book is that the idea of a rogue CIA operation is probably a contradiction in terms. It's an agency. They are the agents of somebody, supposedly the President of the United States, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they're working for other interests, and most often they are working for what I like to call the masters of the universe.
And it could be that there are pockets of self-employed people within the CIA.
I don't
do what they want.
I don't believe that.
Really?
No, everybody works, and they do what they're told. There was Edmund Wilson, who was convicted of selling arms to Libya back in the 80s. Well, he was one of the guys who was in with all these other people who brought in the arms and to the Contras, and helped bring the drugs into the United States. I mean, these are people within the government. They were doing this kind of thing for the government. Somebody was authorizing. Otherwise, you get eliminated, the same as you would in the old Soviet Union. They got Edmund Wilson because Wilson got rich on his own hook. He was going beyond what he was told, and they let him hang. They let him be prosecuted. That is, the aegis of the CIA and the federal government was removed. It's the same thing that happened to Barry Seal. Barry Seal was moving drugs to the United States all through the 80s. He flew him in. He flew him into Mena, Arkansas, and he was protected by the federal government. Every time they would try to bring an indictment against him in the state of Arkansas or by the federal government, by the attorney general, the U.S. attorneys, something would come down on them that would stop it. So, the CIA had its hand in it. But they don't do it on their own. Somebody was telling them to do that. Somebody in the White House probably. Or somebody told somebody in the White House to make it happen or make it not happen. So, no, I don't think so. I think what happens is that the CIA does what it's told. And not always the same person telling her, right? But there has to be some authorization.
So Howard Zinn and James Loewen gave us a clear, unbiased view of history.
Right.
And now
People's history and the
lies
my teachers don't know.
Right. And now with McConkey, you join the ranks. And
well, that was the idea. I mean, they're both in. Those are books that I was looking toward. As far as fiction is concerned, I don't think anybody's ever asked me so. I'll tell it anyway. I was interested in Thomas Berger's book, Little Big Man. Do you remember that? It was a movie made out of it, and it was about a white man who was captured by the Indians. And was that little big one? He ends up talking about the world of the West from the Indian perspective and from the white man's perspective, and he was watching all these things happen, and from all this history from an ordinary person's point of view, that was one of the things that I was interested in, the juxtaposition of big events as they impact our ordinary people. And also there are some books by Upton Sinclair. It's the Lanny Budd series of a young man who is the son of a huge arms dealer. The one I think he had from Connecticut. I think the one he had in mind was Colt, which I think used to be in Hartford, Connecticut. Or it's probably in China now. But and the way we got, he's in Europe before World War I. He's working for the State Department after World War II, putting together the Versailles Treaty. So he's there, and you've got his life and his father's arms, and eventually he goes to work for his father and sells arms as we go through the Depression and then end up in World War II. So and there are about 9 or 10 of those books I did. And they served as a model for me as well.
Well, thanks for your contribution to the pile of stories that have gone down. And
I want to ask you one question. I want to ask you.
Okay.
What was your favorite part of the book?
The big story.
Huh?
The big story.
Really, the big picture?
The big picture. About page 375 or something. The
big
picture.
Right.
Yeah.
So that comes out of. Did you notice the hook with the previous chapter when Bill Duncan is trying to, break the Mena cocaine business? He works for the Internal Revenue Service, and his career is ruined for trying to, break this federal government involvement in a drug cartel, and he loses his job, and toward the end of the chapters, somebody says to somebody else, Bill Duncan's got to sue the big picture. And then it leads into how all this happened to us.
Well, what's significant to me was the change, the political change in the country that happened under Reagan. And how it's not changed. His knee slapper, corny anecdote ability got him some stature. It's never been lost.
But when in the book, I call it the Reagan Bush years, and because I think George Bush was actually the president the whole time. And I think he was tired by the time he was running against Bill Clinton. And nobody's ever examined the close relationship between George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, because they're still friends. And Clinton was George H.W. Bush's boy. And I don't think people understand how much damage Clinton did. But Alan Greenspan called him one of the best Republican presidents he'd ever had. He did. He was head of the Fed the whole time Clinton was president. He ought to know. Anyway, thanks for asking, Gordon. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I was thinking how hard it is in a country as big as this to actually make a dent in the political dialogue or the political dialectic. And one of the things in my book, I think it could be even the most important thing, is how the left has been silenced over and over. In the First World War by the Red Scare that came after the First World War, and the Second Red Scare in the post World War II period, in the Cold War, which one of the intended or unintended consequences of the Cold War was to make everybody afraid of socialism. The whole business of containment, which was used to overthrow left-leaning governments forever, right up until Chavez in Venezuela. The attempts to either overthrow them by military force or by CIA-instigated coup. I mean, the most recent of those is in Ukraine.
Well, emotional elements had taken over. I mean, all of the communist stuff was fear-based. And that, if logic had a chance, the left would have a chance. But emotions seemed to take over rule.
It's very difficult to get any traction when the media and all the rest of the establishment is right way.
Right. Well, there goes democracy. If you don't have, and Mr. Clinton, her husband, had something to do with that in '96 in his Communications Act of '96.
Yeah.
When there was this consolidation of media.
Yep.
That was allowed. Suddenly, Fox News could own the radio station, the TV station, the newspaper, all in one town.
And they did away with the fairness doctrine, where if you had an opinion on one side of the political scale, you had to balance it out with an alternative, with somebody who represented the alternative. That's what makes Fox News possible too. They can spew that. But Fox News is only just further to the right than, say, NBC or CNN. It's interesting, when Ted Turner had CNN, it was pretty open, and then they sold it to ABC. Somebody, one of the big broadcasters owns it. One of the things that's really interesting to me is the way the world is now, with Wall Street banks and controlling our government, political candidates, and large corporations like the Koch brothers, controlling our candidates and a lot of politicians who are in office, is that the striking thing to me was that it's all happened before. That the period from the post-Civil War years until 1933, except for a few deviations into virtue under the progressives and Freddie Roosevelt, was pretty much a history of ordinary people losing ground, and the rise of the American Empire, and all the stuff that we're facing now in terms of corruption, the country being owned by the super rich. This all has happened before, and almost overnight. Franklin Roosevelt was able to put an end to. Now, that's not going to happen with Bernie Sanders. There's not going to be that kind of overnight political revolution. But over the next 2 to 4 years, we could see a big change in this country. And as you pointed out earlier, the big socialist changes to make the playing field more equal for ordinary people did not occur until 35 and 36. Those were in the really big social programs came in, Social Security. You talked about all. But the key thing to me is that it has all happened before. They stole our country from us over the course of 2 generations until 1933, and then it was overturned. I mean, they called Roosevelt a socialist. That damn socialist Roosevelt. And when they got hold of it again under Eisenhower, they thought it would stick. And then we got John Kennedy, who didn't last, and we got Lyndon Johnson, and who went back to the New Deal. That was still an ideal right there. And then after that, as from Nixon on until Obama, who actually wanted to change and lower Social Security. Remember the Cat Food Commission, a Democrat and a Republican on it to ruin our social programs. But that's a generation right there, and maybe it's time to have another political revolution. It's happened before. It worked before. Right. Why not now? As long as we can keep Bernie Sanders alive.
We can overcome money inertia that is in place.
This is such a big country. It's such a huge country. You think about trying to, make any dent at all in an elephant as huge as America. It's just, it'd be a lot easier if the country were way smaller, right? Yeah. If you think about a generation as being 30 years, which is about what it is. There are 2 generations from the period after the American Civil War, say with the Grant administration and the rise of industrial capitalism in America. That's from, we could say, 1870 to about 1933. Those 2 generations, basically the capitalists, the bankers, bought this country. They owned the politicians. So that by the 1920s, of course, the Republican Party was owned by Wall Street, but so was the Democratic Party. 1924 candidate for president for the Democratic Party was John W. Davis, who was the lawyer for J.P. Morgan. So they had what Eugene Debs and later Robert Kennedy Jr. called the 2 political parties were the 2 wings on the same bird. And that's the duopoly we talk about today. And then from 1933 to 1963, or as you pointed out, through Lyndon Johnson, to 1965, 66.
Civil rights, 65.
Yeah. There was no more great society once the Vietnam War got to be important. So you could say that generation of the New Deal from 1933, then 1963, 64, 65, with Medicare and the Civil Rights Act, all of these attempts at political and economic equality. And then there's kind of a hiatus in there, an interregnum, could say, between kins, from the fall of Richard Nixon until the rise of Ronald Reagan, where you've got a president and vice president who were not even elected, and Gerald Ford and Nelson Rockefeller. It's unprecedented. Neither one of them was elected to the office that they held, and so from 1980 through until a change begins to occur in 2008. You got another generation with the election of Barack Obama, and all of these young people and the rise of the internet and the social media that meant that groups could move without any of the bottleneck of official politics. You could donate money online. You could all show up in the same place in a flash mob. You could and you have Occupy Wall Street, and where ordinary people say this isn't right. And so you've got Obama, who was supposed to be our new hope, but he wasn't the people's person that we thought he was. So you get Occupy, and then you get Bernie Sanders, and now we're into a new generation. So if the Sanders phenomenon can stick, this maybe we'll have another 30 years that redresses the depredations of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex.
We can only hope.
We can hope.
Right.
Good. Does that